Sebastian laughed loudly, splashing orange juice all over the table. "Someone like you shouldn't go near important people," he snapped. Brenda, the new waitress, trembled as she wiped up the liquid with nervous movements. His response left her speechless, the laughter frozen on her face. Sebastian Valdemar leaned back in his luxurious Italian leather chair, valued at $10,000, gazing out from the private balcony of his restaurant insignia at the constant flow of people moving through the streets of the metropolis. Essentially, the gastronomic empire was practically his. At 52, he had amassed a fortune that had positioned him as the most successful magnate in the national sector, but also as the most uncompromising. His restaurant, Palacio Dorado, stood as a symbol of his overflowing opulence. Vaulted Italian marble ceilings, bohemian crystal chandeliers worth more than many homes, and a panoramic view of the financial heart of the city that served as a constant reminder of his superior position above everyone else. However, what Sebastian loved most was not his. True wealth did not lie in material possessions, but in the power that allowed him to humiliate those he saw as inferior. Mr. Valdemar, the voice cut off by his general manager's nervousness, brought him out of his thoughts as he climbed the stairs to his private quarters. "The investors from Singapore are here." "Excellent," he replied with a cold, ruthless smile that conveyed a clear message of threat. It was time to show them why he was the undisputed ruler of gastronomy in the nation. Sebastian walked toward the gilded mirror in his office, carefully adjusting his silk tie. The price of the jewel exceeded the monthly salary of his workers. His image in the mirror reflected a man who had mistaken economic success for a position of superiority, who had turned cruelty into his favorite pastime. For 2 decades, Sebastian had developed the ability to publicly humiliate others. He fired waiters for the slightest mistake, such as spilling a single drop of water. He demanded dishes from the chefs that he considered worthy of his restaurant, and openly ridiculed employees who made small mistakes. For him, every humiliation served as proof of power. Every tear shed by a worker was a seal of his dominance. "Look, you inferior beings!" Sebastian bellowed as he descended the stairs to the main dining room, where 30 employees stood in line, like soldiers in formation, waiting to be inspected. "Tonight we are hosting investors who could increase our empire tenfold. If any of you, you self-proclaimed culinary experts, make even the slightest mistake, not only will I fire you, but I will personally see to it that you never work in a respectable restaurant again." The silence in the dining room was deafening. The workers looked at each other fearfully, aware that Sebastian's threats were not empty words. Over the years, they had witnessed how he destroyed professional lives for his own amusement, how he turned evaluations into public humiliations. "You," he said condescendingly to the waiters, "will serve people who are worth more in a single day than you are in your entire miserable existence. I want you to always remember that you are in the presence of..." His superiors had insisted that his every action reflected on the prestige of the establishment. Miguel Herrera, the longtime chef who had been there for 15 years, kept his eyes down, feeling the weight of Sebastian's words. He had witnessed how many colleagues succumbed to the constant pressure, how the toxic atmosphere turned every workday into a nightmare. "And you, Miguel," said Sebastian, approaching the chef menacingly. "I want you to prove tonight that the time I've invested in keeping you here has not been in vain. They haven't been useless, even if only minimally. If there is a single criticism of the food, I promise you that the next day you'll be looking for a job at some low-end restaurant." "Understood, Mr. Valdemar," Miguel replied in an almost inaudible tone, feeling shame merge with the pent-up anger he had been harboring for years. At that moment, the front door opened and 5 impeccably dressed individuals entered. Upon the arrival of the Singaporean investors, Sebastian's expression changed immediately. Behind a seemingly charming but cruel smile, he proclaimed with false kindness, "Gentlemen, welcome to the most exclusive temple of gastronomy in all of Latin America." The investors, with obvious approval, toured the luxurious interior of the place. Mr. Chen, at the head of the group, nodded with satisfaction as he appreciated the architectural ornaments. "Mr. Valdemar, the pictures did not convey the magnitude of this space," Chen commented with his marked accent. "It is truly impressive." "This is merely the beginning," Sebastian replied. With an air of superiority, he assured them that they could expect a complete gastronomic experience. He would show them why he was considered the most innovative leader in the industry. As he led them to the main table, Sebastian felt the characteristic excitement that accompanied him every time he had the opportunity to showcase his expertise. That night, he would not only close the most important deal of his career, but he would do so in a resounding manner, humiliating his team in front of international magnates. "Please take a seat at our main table." Sebastian pointed to a table adorned with gold tableware and crystal glassware worth the equivalent of a high-end car. At that moment, the back door of the restaurant opened softly, allowing a young woman of about 26 to enter, moving nervously, wearing a waitress uniform that seemed too big for her. Her hands trembled slightly as she approached the other workers. This was Brenda Morales, and it was her first day on the job. He spotted her right away, and his eyes became fixed on her. His eyes shone with the same intensity as a hunter who has discovered his ideal prey. A newly arrived waitress, visibly nervous, on the most significant night of the year. The occasion was too tempting to pass up. "Just a moment, gentlemen," Sebastian said to the investors with a smile that hinted at amusement. "Let me introduce you to our new talent." Brenda approached cautiously, clearly overwhelmed by the atmosphere of opulence that surrounded her. Her hair was tied back in a simple ponytail, and, despite trying to look her best, it was clear that Brenda was unfamiliar with this kind of refinement. "What's your name, dear?" Sebastian asked, with a false kindness that didn't fool those who knew him well. "My name is Brenda, sir. Brenda Morales," she replied in a voice that was shaken, avoiding eye contact. Sebastian pronounced her name as if it were an inside joke. "What part of town are you from, Brenda?" he asked. "The San Miguel neighborhood," Brenda replied, unaware that the word Sebastian uttered was considered by him to be a projectile intended for the humiliation he had in mind. The investors followed the interaction with growing interest, unaware that they were about to witness the spectacle of cruelty that Sebastian had refined over the years. With a superior smile, San Miguel Sebastian addressed the investors. "It is an iconic neighborhood in our city, known for the resilience of its residents, who learn to thrive despite limitations." The sense of hardship was palpable in every corner. The other employees avoided eye contact, aware of what was coming, but unable to stop it. "Brenda, dear," Sebastian began in a sweet voice, "you have experience serving, shall we say, high-ranking clients." "Not much, sir, but I am willing to gain experience," Brenda replied sincerely, unaware that her frankness would become a hook. With a malicious smile, Sebastian addressed the investors. "Did you hear that, gentlemen? We have a young lady here who..." The neighborhood was preparing to serve foreign millionaires, an idea that made Mr. Chen and his colleagues uncomfortable. A feeling of unease came over them as they watched the situation unfold. Brenda Sebastian, like a shark with a taste for blood, approached her with a triumphant smile. "This is your one chance," he said. "You will be serving these distinguished gentlemen, and we shall all see how quickly someone from your background can learn the subtleties of world-class service." Brenda nodded nervously. She couldn't fully comprehend the evil behind Sebastian's words, although her intuition warned her that something terrible was about to happen. "Let's start with something simple," said Sebastian, pointing to the table where the investors were sitting. "Bring freshly squeezed orange juice for our guests," and Brenda paused, enjoying the suspense of the moment. "Try not to let them know where you come from." Brenda made her way to the kitchen with faltering steps, aware of the intensity of the stares following her. Her hands trembled slightly as she advanced toward the juice machine, aware that every action was being observed, analyzed, ready to be exploited to her detriment. The kitchen of the Golden Palace, a combination of stainless steel and cutting-edge technology, was a stage where machines, whose price exceeded the value of a home, hummed discreetly while chefs, with the precision of surgeons, performed their tasks. However, at that moment, all that splendor only terrified her, failing to impress her. "Calm down, dear," whispered Carmen, a seasoned waitress of 50 years old. She had endured 10 under the regime of terror imposed by Sebastian. "Do everything calmly. Don't give him any reason to attack." "Is it always like this?" Brenda whispered as she picked the most flawless oranges from the high-end refrigerator. Carmen looked at her with a mixture of pity and sadness. "This is just a small sample, girl. When Sebastian decides to make someone his nighttime entertainment, it can be infinitely worse. I've seen people leave here with tears in their eyes, completely psychologically destroyed." Brenda felt a sudden chill that her hands moved over her back as she squeezed the oranges, every action calculated, meticulous, seeking to avoid any mistake that might give Sebastian the opportunity to embarrass her in front of those influential men. Sebastian, on the other hand, was in his natural habitat in the main hall. He was accompanying the investors, but his gaze was fixed on the kitchen door, waiting patiently like a cat stalking its prey. During their conversation, Mr. Chen attempted to steer the discussion towards Senor Valdemar. The investors approached with a proposal. "Would you be interested in discussing the conditions for expansion in the Asian market?" "Of course, I'd be happy to," Sebastian replied, though his gaze was distracted. "But first, I'd like to share something that I consider essential to my business approach." The other investors looked at each other with uncertainty. Mr. Tanaka, a veteran of international business with years of experience, frowned slightly. "Business philosophy?" Tanaka asked with a hint of curiosity. "Personnel management," Sebastian smiled. With malice in his words, he clarified to the gentleman that success in the world of gastronomy is not based solely on delicious food or an elegant atmosphere. Success, he said, lies in keeping employees under control, in making them understand precisely their place in the social hierarchy. Mr. Williamson, the youngest investor in the group, shifted uneasily in his seat. What did he mean by that statement? They were about to find out. Sebastian responded with a smile that foreshadowed ruthless action. In the kitchen, Brenda had finished. The juices were ready. 5 imported glass cups, each filled with freshly squeezed orange juice and presented to perfection, awaited on the table. Carmen helped her carry the glasses on a silver tray, checking that everything was in place. "Remember," Carmen reminded her, "keep the tray steady, walk carefully, and no matter what happens, don't answer. Just smile and nod." Brenda took a deep breath, accepted the instruction, and made her way to the main living room. Each footprint she left on the marble floor echoed like a drumbeat, announcing her future. The other workers, They felt a mixture of compassion and relief that they weren't in her position. As Brenda entered the main hall, Sebastian sat up straight in his chair, like a hunter who has spotted his prey. The investors watched her advance, noticing her obvious uneasiness. "Here comes our star," Sebastian proclaimed in a powerful voice, making sure everyone in the restaurant could hear him. "Join us as we watch someone of her caliber perform while serving important people." Brenda walked to the table She held the tray perfectly balanced with great care. Her heart was beating so fast that she thought everyone could feel it. "Freshly squeezed orange juice for the gentleman," she said, in a trembling but firm voice, as she began to hand the first glass to Mr. Chen. "Wait a moment, please," Sebastian stopped her abruptly. "This is how investors with fortunes of hundreds of millions of dollars are served, without protocol, without refinement, as if you were in a humble establishment, without the slightest distinction." The atmosphere in the restaurant became heavy and tense. All the workers held their breath, aware that the scene was about to take an even more humiliating turn. "I'm sorry, sir," Brenda murmured, visibly confused about her mistake. "You're sorry?" Sebastian stood up dramatically, his voice echoing throughout the dining room. "Do you realize the value of the suits these gentlemen are wearing? Do you have any idea of the kind of attention they expect to receive?" The investors followed the situation closely. A growing unease was palpable in the air. Mr. Chen tried to mediate. "Mr. Valdemar, it's really not necessary," he said gently. "Of course it is necessary," Valdemar replied firmly. Sebastian, without giving him time to reply, interrupted decisively. "These gentlemen must clearly understand the level of standards that prevail in my business," he declared. Then, with a cruel look, he turned to Brenda. "And you need to understand that you are not serving your neighbors in San Miguel." Brenda held the tray steady, but her face flushed with embarrassment. She felt the pitying glances of my co-workers and the growing unease of the investors. "Let's start over," Sebastian proclaimed dramatically. "But this time, I want you to show them the respect they deserve. These men are figures of enormous importance in the industry, and you are who you are." Mr. Williamson tried to speak, showing obvious discomfort. "I think the young lady is doing a perfectly adequate job." "Adequate," Sebastian repeated, turning to the investor with a smile that smacked of superiority. "Williamson, with all due respect, you don't understand the way Success in the service industry in countries like this is based on discipline, hierarchical structure, and respect for different social classes." Brenda, with renewed caution, resumed her work, her hands trembling as she placed the first glass in front of Mr. Chen. "Better," said Sebastian sarcastically, "although I can still see your hands shaking." "It's the excitement of being in the presence of true magnates of success," he added. "Yes, sir," replied Brenda. Brenda responded sincerely, unaware that she was feeding Sebastian's cruelty. That was true. Sebastian applauded with feigned joy. "At last you recognize your place in the natural hierarchy. These men have built empires, created jobs for multitudes, and shaped entire economies. And you," he paused, enjoying the moment, "come from a neighborhood where people earn a living in menial jobs." Mr. Tanaka looked clearly uncomfortable at these words. Throughout her decades of experience, Brenda had observed diverse corporate cultures, but this situation was exceptional. It was a clear example of cruelty masquerading as management. Brenda continued serving, placing the second glass in front of Mr. Tanaka. Her actions had become automatic, trying to isolate herself from the hurtful words that continued to be uttered. Sebastian mercilessly continued his speech. "Look at that concentration." He ironically praised the ability of someone from his background to focus so much energy on such a basic task as serving juice? Presumably, when someone comes from nothing, even the simplest tasks, they were perceived as great triumphs. Carmen, despite the distance, clenched her fists, unable to do anything. She had observed this sequence numerous times, but Sebastian's systematic cruelty never ceased to surprise her. As Brenda approached to offer the third glass, Sebastian decided it was the right moment to intensify the show. "Just a moment," he declared, raising his hand theatrically. He felt that our guests should fully understand the contrast that was being presented to them. He stood up and started pacing around Brenda. Like a hunter stalking his prey, he was facing a young woman who probably earned in a month what any of those men would spend on a single meal. She was a woman whose education was limited to high school, serving men who had graduated from the most prestigious universities in the world. The looks between the investors became increasingly tense. What had started as a professional dinner was turning into an unexpected situation for all of them. Chen, the gentleman named Sebastian, attempted, once again, perhaps it would be appropriate. "No, no," Sebastian cut him off with false enthusiasm. "This is a lesson. It is crucial that you observe how I manage social differences in my company." Brenda had finished her fourth glass and was heading for the last one, where Mr. Williamson was sitting. Her hands were shaking more intensely now, not only from the tension, but also from the growing embarrassment she felt in front of everyone present. "Look at those hands shaking," Sebastian snapped cruelly. "Do you know why they're shaking?" "Nambalam, it's simply anxiety, the instinctive reflex of her position on the social ladder. Her body senses the presence of those who wield greater power. It was the last straw that broke the camel's back." Mr. Williamson, a man who had built his wealth on unshakable ethical values, stood up abruptly. "Enough," he proclaimed in a sharp voice. "This is intolerable." Silence fell over the entire restaurant. Sebastian blinked, clearly surprised that any of the investors would challenge him. "Excuse me?" he asked, his smile faltering. For the first time that evening, Williamson stood his ground. "I've reached my limit," he declared, staring intently at Sebastian. "What we're seeing here is not good management. It's constant abuse, and I won't tolerate it any longer." Sebastian's face turned red with a mixture of anger and embarrassment. In all his years of humiliating his employees, he had never been challenged by an investor. "Williamson, I'm sure you don't understand my method." "No, you're not misunderstanding anything," Williamson replied, cutting him off. "Frankly, this makes me seriously question our ability to partner with an individual who views his employees as mere entertainment." At the height of the tension, as Sebastian struggled to regain control of the situation, the unexpected happened. Brenda, her hands clasped together in embarrassment and stress, momentarily lost control of the tray. The last glass of juice slipped, and in a heartbreaking act, crashed onto the table, leaving a pool of orange juice on the white marble. The ensuing silence was deafening. Sebastian saw the spilled liquid, then fixed his gaze on Brenda, and a cold, victorious smile lit up his face, as if he had obtained the most desired gift of his existence. "Perfect," he murmured, but his word was heard throughout the restaurant. Simply perfect. The orange liquid gradually slid across the white marble surface, staining it a golden red, each drop capturing the light from the chandelier before falling to the floor with a steady rhythm that echoed like a drum in the deep stillness of the restaurant. Sebastian. He watched the liquid spill with the same eerie fascination as a child with psychopathic tendencies watching his first anthill burn. "Exactly," Sebastian murmured, his tone low but tinged with a poisonous satisfaction that sent a chill of terror through every employee present. It was, without a doubt, incredibly perfect. The employee stood petrified, still holding the empty tray, staring at the mess she had just caused with a look of unspeakable horror. Her eyes filled with tears as she struggled with all her might to maintain her composure, aware that showing any sign of weakness at that moment would be like fueling the fire that threatened to erupt. Doña Morales Sebastián pronounced her name with the gravity of a death sentence, moving slowly around the puddle of juice like a predator stalking its wounded victim. "Can you explain what happened here?" "I'm so sorry, Mr. Valdemar," Brenda stammered, her voice barely a trembling thread. "It was an accident." My fingers were shaking with nervousness. "Your hands were shaking, Sebastian," she interrupted with a laugh that seemed to shatter glass. "They trembled as you served investors who controlled billions, as you were the face of my restaurant before the heavyweights of Southeast Asia." The audience watched with a disturbing combination of fear and fascination. Don Chen's face had turned pale, while Don Tanaka glanced subtly at his watch, clearly showing his desire to be anywhere else. Elsewhere, only Williamson stood firm with a cold, determined look, ready to act if necessary. "Look at her," Sebastian addressed the investors with his hands outstretched in a theatrical gesture, as if displaying evidence in a courtroom. "This is the kind of talent that emerges from disadvantaged sectors, a task as basic as serving juice, and she can't handle it without causing chaos." Carmen, the longtime waitress, moved forward involuntarily, driven by a maternal instinct that urged her to protect the young woman, but Miguel, the head chef, stopped her with a firm gesture, preventing her from getting further involved. They both understood that any action would only aggravate Brenda's situation and probably lead to them losing their jobs. "Do you know the price of this table?" insisted Sebastian, his cruel speech focused on the stained surface. "Do you have any idea of the value of what you've damaged with your lack of skill?" Brenda replied in a trembling voice, feeling each answer hit her pride even harder. "Of course you don't have that information, Sebastian." Her voice rang out in the restaurant, echoing everywhere like a powerful thunderclap. This Carrara marble table, brought directly from Italy and valued at more than 5 years of family earnings, had been stained by your carelessness, Sebastian. Mr. Williamson stood up, his tolerance at its limit. "Valdemar, that's enough. I think we all understand that it was an accident, a simple mistake." "A simple mistake," Williamson insisted. Sebastian, his eyes filled with rage, turned toward Williamson. "Williamson, are you sure this is nothing more than—" "An accident? That is the inevitable consequence of hiring people who do not fit into our social class," Williamson emphasized, with a voice full of disdain. "You speak as if we were a different race of humans." "We are," Sebastian exclaimed, completely losing the composure he had cultivated over years of premeditated cruelty. "We are the ones who build empires, who generate wealth, who shape the world, while she comes from a place where people are content to simply exist." Brenda persisted. Her head was bowed, but inside her something unusual was happening. With every cruel word Sebastian uttered, with every insult he added, a latent force that had been dormant for months began to reawaken. An essence that she herself had buried under economic distress and the urgent need to survive. "Look at those tears," Sebastian said, pointing at Brenda with utter condescension. "The tears of someone who finally recognizes her place in life. Tears of acknowledgement of his own inferiority." Sebastian, the Senor Chen tried to smooth things over with diplomatic words, suggesting that perhaps they should allow the young woman to clean up the spill and then continue with the meeting. But Sebastian cut him off sharply. This situation, he said, should serve as a lesson to everyone in the restaurant. A lesson about the struggle for success, about standards, about the reason for social inequalities. He approached Brenda, invading her personal space with a threatening attitude that caused several employees to remain silent. "Tell me, Brenda from San Miguel, Sebastian." He threw her name and origin at her like insults. "What kind of education did you get? Did you even finish high school, or are you just another dropout?" Brenda slowly raised her gaze, and for the first time since she had arrived at the restaurant, looked him in the eye. There was a change in her face, something he hadn't noticed before, a new quality that had been lost in her uncontrolled rage. "I finished high school, sir," she replied with more determination in her voice than at any other time. Night fell over the high school. Sebastian, with a maniacal laugh, addressed the investors. "You heard that. Finishing high school, as if it were some kind of triumph," he exclaimed. "Meanwhile," he pointed to himself and the investors, "we have master's degrees from Harvard, Yale, Oxford. I even have an MBA from Wharton." "Do you even know the importance of Wharton, Brenda?" he asked with an intensity that caught Carmen's attention, who looked up curiously. "I recognize that it's Wharton." Sebastian's eyes widened for a moment, astonished by the sudden confidence in her tone, but his wounded pride prevented him from fully understanding what she had said. "Really?" he sneered. "A waitress from the neighborhood knows about high-level business schools? Was this something from a movie?" The investors watched the conversation with growing unease. Mr. Tanaka had begun to take subtle notes on his phone, clearly recording what he was seeing for future reference. "No," Brenda replied, and now there was something in her voice that made Miguel, the head chef, moved a little closer. "I know, because I studied there," he said. A heavy, almost tangible silence filled the room after his statement. Sebastian was stunned, his mouth open, clearly trying to process the words, but unable to comprehend their meaning. "What did you say?" his voice asked, now with less confidence. "That I studied at Wharton," Brenda replied. And little by little, she recovered, as if waking up from a long and frightening nightmare. MBA in management. Coming from a background in business and corporate finance, I graduated in the top 5% of my class. A deathly silence had fallen over the restaurant. Every employee, every investor, every individual present stared at Brenda as if she had emerged from another world. Sebastian burst out laughing, but his laughter was nervous, forced, more like a high-pitched moan of pain. "That's impossible," he exclaimed, but for the first time that night, his voice carried an echo of doubt. "You're a waitress. You're from San Miguel. People like you. Brenda doesn't go to schools like Wharton." "People like me," Brenda repeated, and a new tension, one that made Carmen smile for the first time in years, took hold of her voice. "What exactly do you mean by people like me, Mr. Valdemar?" she asked. "You know exactly what I mean," Sebastian replied, but his confidence was wavering like a house of cards in a storm. "No," Brenda said, moving closer to Sebastian, who instinctively stepped back. "I think you should be more specific. Are you referring to low-income people, residents of modest neighborhoods, who had to work 3 jobs to pay for their college education?" The investors were completely immersed in what was happening before them, leaning forward in their seats. A small smile appeared on Mr. Williamson's lips. "Because that's exactly who I am," Brenda continued, her voice growing stronger with each sentence. "I was someone who cleaned offices at night to pay for my studies. A person who also worked in coffee shops during the day and night kept him awake, studying until the sun came up." Sebastian, a young man who had graduated with honors, now looked pale and disoriented. His view of the world, where people were neatly classified according to their social and economic status, was crumbling. "That can't be possible," he muttered, but his voice lacked the conviction he once had. "Why can't it be possible?" Brenda replied with a defiant look. Now her eyes were filled with tears, but they weren't tears of shame. They were tears. Years of repressed pain, of violated dignity, of destroyed aspirations. Sebastian began to speak, but his voice faltered, because it did not conform to his narrow concept of how an educated person should speak. "And then what?" he tried to say, but he couldn't finish the sentence. Brenda picked up the thread of the question he had been unable to complete. "Why is someone with an MBA from Wharton serving drinks in this place?" Anguish overwhelmed Sebastian. His breathing became agitated. He felt his reality crumbling, but he was unable to stop what had already begun. "Movement," said my father, Brenda, his voice now resonating with unrelenting clarity and determination, as if forged in steel. "For 30 years, he worked as a mechanic to finance my education, sacrificing every day of his life so that I could have opportunities he never had." Tears now flowed freely down his cheeks, but his body remained upright, projecting a proud strength. 6 months ago, he was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. The treatment far exceeds what our family can even conceive. My mother also suffers from heart problems. My little brother is in college. The tranquility in the restaurant was so spacious that the ticking of the wall clock could be heard from the other end of the room. "Yes, Mr. Valdemar," Brenda replied, her voice resonating with incisive dignity. "I find myself here serving juice, here cleaning tables, here enduring the insults of men like you, because every penny is vital to keeping my father alive." Sebastian, meanwhile, had backed up until he was pressed against the chair of one of the assistants. His face had changed color, from a deep red with rage to an icy white with surprise. "However, what you fail to understand," Brenda continued, approaching him, "is that my dignity does not derive from my occupation. My essence as a person is not based on whether I serve or manage, and it certainly will not be affected by the opinions of someone who mistakenly believes that inherited wealth equates to superiority." Mr. Chen rose slowly, initiating a round of applause that was quickly joined by Mr. Williamson, followed by Tanaka. Each employee at the restaurant started, one by one. The applause spread, echoing through the space like thunder. Sebastian scanned the restaurant, observing for the first time in a long time the expressions of those he had been degrading. In every glance, he perceived not only admiration for Brenda, but a clear aversion toward him. His mastery of cruelty was crumbling, and he was the only one oblivious to the fact that his power had been built on a fragile foundation. The applause reverberated through the luxurious venue like a melody of justice. Each beat was another hammer nail driven into the coffin of his ego. Sebastian Valdemar. The echo reverberated off the marble walls, amplifying the sound in a way that seemed to mock him, taunting him from every corner of his own sanctuary of vanity. Sebastian stood motionless, his expression reflecting deep astonishment and utter confusion. For 52 years, he had lived with the unshakable conviction that wealth and social status were direct measures of human worth. That conviction had vanished in that instant, shattered by the very woman who, just minutes ago, had been willing to humiliate him without remorse. "Enough!" Finally, his voice cracked like glass under the strain. "Enough of this spectacle!" But the applause did not stop. It only grew more frenzied. Carmen, the longtime waitress, had tears streaming down her cheeks as she clapped with an intensity that revealed years of repressed humiliation. Miguel, the head chef, clapped with his weathered hands, which had endured generations of insults. His expression lit up with a satisfaction he hadn't felt in a long time. With courtesy, Mr. Williamson walked over to Brenda, offering his hand. "Your full name, please, ma'am," he insisted genuinely. "Morales," Brenda replied, wiping away her tears as she clung to the dignity she had demanded. "Brenda Morales, MBA in Business Administration, with a focus on corporate turnaround processes," she clarified. Williamson repeated her name with a smile that lit up his face. "What a coincidence," he remarked. "Such a unique specialization for someone who is seeing firsthand the collapse of a poorly managed company." Williamson met Sebastian's gaze, his eyes filled with desperate. "It's ridiculous, right? They can't really think that a simple waitress—" "A waitress." Mr. Chen cut off his speech with the same abruptness as a knife. "Mr. Valdemar, what we just saw is not the statement of a waitress, but that of a highly trained expert who, due to exceptional circumstances, has been forced to take a position that is far below her level. And most importantly," Mr. Tanaka added, putting away his phone after documenting the entire scene, "is the response from that man, who exuded more class and dignity than Sebastian in his entirety, hit him like a physical blow. The words hurt Sebastian, for these men, whom he had eagerly sought out all night, now looked at him with the same condescension he had shown his subordinates for years." "Ms. Morales," Mr. Chen spoke directly to Brenda, without even acknowledging Sebastian's presence. "Would you mind sharing your observations about how this place operates with us?" As she surveyed the restaurant, Brenda finally allowed herself to appreciate the atmosphere that had previously been lost on her due to her tension. Her eyes, accustomed to meticulous observation, began to register every detail, automatically classifying them according to the business education she had received. "Do you really want to know?" she replied in the professional voice she had cultivated during her years of MBA training. Williamson encouraged her with kind words, while Sebastian, motionless as a deer in the headlights, found himself unable to move. Brenda took a deep breath and began her speech in a clear, firm voice that filled the restaurant. "From a practical standpoint, this location has several serious deficiencies in its personnel management that are negatively affecting both efficiency and future financial viability." The shareholders looked at each other with expressions of astonishment. The language used, the way the analysis was structured, and the confidence with which it was presented clearly showed that this was a well-educated person. Brenda, with an authentic business demeanor, continued walking through the restaurant as if she were about to present a strategic plan. The work atmosphere, according to her, was built on fear and humiliation, leading to high employee turnover, low morale, and poor productivity. Sebastian tried to object, but Mr. Tanaka stopped him with a cold stare. Second, Brenda stopped in front of the kitchen. "I noticed that the kitchen staff is working under intense pressure, which leads to an increase in the punitive and vertical communication within the company significantly increases the risk of errors, workplace accidents, and deficiencies in quality control." Miguel nodded vigorously, recognizing in Brenda's words the reality he had experienced for years. Third, Brenda addressed the investors, pointing out that the lack of channels for constructive feedback or innovation from the operational levels is a critical problem. This, she said, was enough. Sebastian lost control, his distress reaching a boiling point. "I won't allow an employee is trying to damage my image with key investors." Brenda turned to him with a calmness that unsettled him more than any display of anger. "Valdemar, you damaged your own reputation when you decided that treating employees with contempt was an acceptable form of entertainment. But there's more," she added, Turning back to the investors. From an economic standpoint, this operating system is simply not viable. The continuous turnover of employees carries significant hidden costs in areas such as recruitment, training, and institutional inefficiency was evident. Mr. Chen hurriedly took notes on his tablet. What other shortcomings had she identified? Brenda replied without hesitation, waste. She pointed out that inventory protocols in the kitchen were poor. Portion sizes were inconsistent because staff were reluctant to ask for clarification, and low morale meant that no one felt motivated to identify ways to improve efficiency. Carmen approached timidly, her face clearly showing her impression of the analysis she was following closely. "May I speak?" Brenda asked warmly. "Everything she says is true," Carmen affirmed, her voice heavy with emotion. "We've witnessed these situations for years, but we never dared to say anything." "Carmen," Sebastian exclaimed abruptly, "are you fired?" "No," Williamson interjected firmly. "She's not." The statement echoed like thunder in the restaurant. Sebastian looked at Williamson in astonishment. "Excuse me, what authority do you have to determine who works in my establishment?" In response to the acquisition proposal, Williamson replied calmly, indicating that someone was considering buying the restaurant and turning it into a successful business. Sebastian turned pale instantly. "Buy my restaurant?" he asked incredulously. "This restaurant is not for sale, Mr. Valdemar," Mr. Chen said in a professional but icy voice. "I don't think you understand the nature of our visit tonight. We came here to explore a possible expansion partnership. What we have experienced has left us confident that—" Tanaka continued, stating that you do not fit the profile of the partner they are looking for. Furthermore, what he observed tonight, according to Tanaka, indicates serious leadership issues that could jeopardize the financial stability of the entire company. Sebastian felt a deep sense of unease. They were making a serious mistake. A dissatisfied employee was ruining decades of achievements, decades of success. Brenda interjected, her voice taking on a sharp edge. "Would you like to evaluate your track record of success in contrast to—" "Which gentleman are you referring to?" "What do you mean?" asked Sebastian, although his voice suggested he wasn't really interested in the answer. "I mean that while you've been celebrating your immediate successes, you've overlooked key signs about the real health of the business," Brenda replied, as she walked toward the center of the restaurant as if it were her own workspace. "During my time here, I've detected patterns that point to serious systemic problems. The employee turnover I mentioned is not limited to— The human resources issue translates into a major financial problem. The investors were clearly interested in the professional analysis that was unfolding. Based on what I've seen so far," Brenda continued, "I estimate that this business is losing between $200,000 and $300,000 annually in employee turnover costs alone." Sebastian was perplexed by the accuracy of the figure. Brenda persisted, adding, "The absence of adequate inventory management protocols leads me to conclude that there are losses, significant implications for waste, and poor resource management." Sebastian tried to respond but remained silent. "How could she know that?" Brenda pressed. "Because my experience in business recovery processes has enabled me to detect these inefficiencies in operations. But more significantly," she added with growing conviction, "because in the last 3 hours, I have witnessed a masterclass on all the mistakes that can be made when leading a company." The silence that followed was overwhelming. Employees looked at Brenda with a mixture of surprise and respect, while investors tried to comprehend the implications of what they had heard. "Ms. Morales," Mr. Chen finally said, "would you be willing to conduct a formal study of these operations?" "For what purpose?" Brenda replied, although the look in her eyes suggested that she already sensed where the conversation was headed, with the possibility of a total management shakeup. Williamson replied bluntly, "In light of what happened tonight, it would be irresponsible on our part to risk an investment under the current management." Sebastian, his voice breaking with despair, exclaimed, "This is a serious blow, a conspiracy. A resentful employee is sabotaging my company." Sebastian Tanaka, with a calmness that was more disturbing than any shouting, declared, "The only thing damaging your company is your own management. What we have seen tonight is more than enough. It's enough to make any experienced investor seriously question your leadership abilities." Brenda approached Sebastian, and for the first time since this difficult situation began, she was the one in control. "Mr. Valdemar," she said in a soft but firm tone, "after spending the entire night questioning me about my education, my background, and my position in life, I now have a question for you." Sebastian looked at her with eyes that reflected deep terror, aware that what was coming would not be compassionate. How had things come to this? When was the last time he had delved into the principles of business management? When was the last time he had assessed the real impact of his decisions as a leader? When had he ever considered, even for a moment, the possibility that he did not know everything? The question rang out like an irrefutable judgment, and Sebastian realized he had no answer. His reign had been built on fragile foundations, and the tide had inevitably turned. Brenda's question hung in the air of the gilded palace, threatening like a guillotine suspended above his head. Sebastian Valdemar, who for years had lived under the illusion that his fortune made him a visionary business leader, was confronted with the harsh truth of his inability to answer a basic question about leadership, something that any first-year MBA student would have known. Ma," Sebastian stammered, his voice fading into a heart-wrenching whisper as he feverishly searched for some solution that could salvage the wreckage of his shattered pride. "Precisely, Brenda." Her response, calm and controlled, was more forceful than any shout. "You don't understand, because your leadership has never been rooted in true business competence, but in intimidation, fear, and the abusive exercise of power." Mr. Williamson took out his phone and began to speak quietly, but with a clarity that reached everyone in the restaurant. "Yes, I need you to put together an urgent acquisition study. Yes, this situation demands immediate action." Sebastian's eyes widened in horror as he processed. The consequences of that phone call were unacceptable. They couldn't allow such audacity. This restaurant was his. He had built it from nothing, from scratch. Carmen approached, her voice trembling but her determination unwavering. "Mr. Valdemar, is this really what you want to discuss, building from scratch in front of all of us?" Sebastian turned to Carmen with a look of heartbreaking fury. "You have no authority to speak. You're just a waitress." "Precisely, Carmen," he exclaimed, now with fire in his eyes. "I'm just a waitress. A waitress who has been working at this. For a decade, this restaurant had been her home. A waitress, knowledgeable about every cog that made it run, addressed the investors. Her stance, firm for the first time in years, reflected a new determination. They wanted to know who the real pillars of this place were. They, the employees he despised, were responsible for remembering the preferences of regular customers. They were the ones who stayed to work extra shifts when someone left because of abusive treatment. We are the ones who make this place possible, despite the difficulties it presents, not because of them." The applause rang out again, louder and longer this time. Miguel emerged from the kitchen, accompanied by his entire kitchen team. Waiters, receptionists, and even the cleaning staff gathered in the main dining room. Carmen is right, Miguel said, his voice laden with the authority of years of culinary experience resonating throughout the space. I've spent 15 years cooking in this place. I've watched this restaurant earn recognition, not because of Don Valdemar's vision, but in spite of his constant interference. Do you dare? Sebastian began. But Miguel cut him off with an imposition that left him stunned. Yes, I dare, Miguel bellowed, with an intensity he hadn't shown in 15 years. I dare to speak the truth. Every new item on the menu that you have claimed as your own was born in my kitchen. Every culinary technique that makes us unique was created by my team. Addressing the investors, his culinary passion finally freed from the yoke of intimidation. These gentlemen want information about specific operations. Let me explain. In terms of actual practices, for years I have struggled to obtain every top quality ingredient, as he places more emphasis on profit margins than on culinary excellence. I have had to train the chefs clandestinely, as he sees investment in training as a waste of money. Mr. Chen stopped writing by hand and began recording directly on his phone. This is incredible, he muttered. Have these procedures ever been recorded? A new voice joined the conversation. It was Anna, the supervisor of human resources, a 40-year-old woman who had remained silent until then. Human resources, a 40-year-old woman who had remained silent until then, finally spoke up. Do you really want to see the documents, Mr. Chen? She asked. Anna stepped away for a moment and returned with a bulky folder and a tablet. For years, I have been documenting everything accurately, not with the intention of causing harm, but to protect myself legally, she explained as she opened the folder in front of the investors, revealing dozens of pages filled with meticulously organized documents. These are the reports of every incident of verbal abuse recorded in the last 5. For years, resignation letters have been piling up in which employees explicitly describe a toxic work environment. Anna opened a specific section of the folder. It contained the actual cost analyses associated with staff turnover that she had prepared to present to Mr. Valdemar, but which he had refused to look at. Brenda approached, reviewing the documents with her expert eye. May I? She asked, and Anna gave her permission. After quickly reviewing several reports, Brenda looked up at the investors with a countenance that a feeling of mixed astonishment and fear washed over him. Gentlemen, she declared, the estimates she had made recently were conservative. According to this documentation, this restaurant is losing around $450,000 annually, solely due to expenses resulting from poor human resources management. That can't be true, Sebastian exclaimed, but his tone showed increasing distress. My financial reports show consistent profits. And yours? Anna asked with a smile that did not reflect the expression on her face. She was referring to the reports prepared by his financial advisor. Explicitly ignoring the operating costs he considered irrelevant, Valdemar addressed the investors. He instructed accounting to present only gross income and direct expenses. Hiring costs, training, lost productivity due to staff turnover, and management time spent on personnel crises were all classified as general administrative expenses. Tanaka exchanged a meaningful glance with her colleagues. Was it you, Miss Anna? Anna inquired. Vasquez, who holds a bachelor's degree in accounting and an MBA in corporate finance, responded professionally. Williamson, however, insisted, it seems that you are also performing a role that is below your capabilities, even though the answer was already obvious. I have been trying to arrange meetings with Mr. Valdemar for 3 years to discuss financial optimizations, Anna stated. His repeated responses have been that women lack the ability to understand real finance, and that her role is limited to processing documents, not thinking. The shame stamped on Sebastian's face was now completely exposed. Not only had his tyrannical and cruel nature been uncovered, but his business incompetence was also being demonstrated, revealing a fundamental misunderstanding of his own company. "Is there more information?" Anna asked as she opened her tablet. "I've been putting together a comprehensive analysis of operations, with projections of profitability potential under efficient management." The data projected on the screen captivated the investors, who leaned forward with anticipation. With proper management, including innovative human resources policies, inventory optimization, and basic operational restructuring, this restaurant could experience a significant increase in net profitability, around 300%. 300%, exclaimed Mr. Chen, surprised. "Are you completely sure about those numbers?" he asked. "Absolutely," Anna replied with professional confidence. "The estimates are based on industry data for restaurants of similar size and location that apply best management practices." Brenda approached. The tablet in her hand allowed her to quickly review the analysis. "The data is compelling," she said. "In fact, it aligned with patterns observed in identical turnaround processes." "Enough!" Sebastian roared. His last shred of self-control snapped. He couldn't bear to let a handful of disgruntled employees ruin his life. He turned to Brenda with a look of pure hatred. "And you came here with the premeditated intent of ruining my business. This wasn't an accident. It was planned." With a calmness that threatened to turn deadly, Brenda asked, "Do you really believe that, Mr. Valdemar? How could you have planned for my father to be diagnosed with cancer? How could you have foreseen that my family would find itself in dire financial straits? How could you have imagined that I would be forced to take whatever job came my way?" He stepped closer, his figure now imposing. "I did not plan any of these things, but I did take care to maintain my dignity and impeccable manners, no matter the difficulties. And by attacking that dignity, you attacked the wrong person." Mr. Williamson concluded his phone call, and then, "Attention, everyone," he announced. "I have just obtained approval from my board of directors to make an offer to purchase the property immediately." The silence that fell over the group was profound, so intense that even the sounds from the kitchen seemed to disappear. "An offer to buy," Sebastian repeated in a tone of disbelief, as if the words had no meaning for him. Williamson presented a proposal for the complete acquisition of the establishment, including all its properties, brands, and contracts, but with the explicit condition of a profound restructuring of its management. "My restaurant is not for sale," Sebastian insisted, although the force of his statement had diminished. However, Mr. Valdemar and Mr. Chen, in cold, firm voices, interrupted. "After what happened tonight, and after analyzing the documentation provided by your own employees, it is clear that you pose an unacceptable operational and financial risk." Tanaka, to be more precise, emphasized that you represent a risk to our reputation that no responsible investor would be willing to tolerate. Williamson turned to Brenda. "Ms. Morales, would you mind? Would you be interested in taking on the role of Director of Operations in the new organization?" The question fell on the restaurant like a bombshell. Brenda, surprised, did not expect the evening to take such a turn. "Director of Operations," she muttered to herself, trying to process the proposal. "With a salary commensurate with your education and experience," Chen added, "and full authority to implement the improvements you have identified." "This is unbelievable," Sebastian exclaimed, looking incredulous. "My company is offering a position to a waitress," Anna said calmly, denying the statement. "They were offering an executive position to a highly qualified professional who due to unforeseen circumstances was working as a waitress. Miguel turned to Brenda enthusiastically. "If you accept," he said, "could we finally implement all those improvements you suggested?" "The operational improvements?" Brenda replied, her mind already diving into the possibilities. "Not only could we implement them, but we could even exceed them." He then addressed the assembled employees. "How would you like a professional development program? Fair and transparent evaluations? Promotions based on true talent rather than connections?" Tears welled up in Carmen's eyes. Was he serious? "Yes, I am, Carmen," he replied, "because a restaurant like this needs a team that feels valued, respected, and capable of giving their all." "No," Sebastian exclaimed angrily. "You can't do this. It's my legacy. It's my essence." The phrase hung in the silence, and for the first time since the beginning of, at the moment of confrontation, a flash of compassion appeared in Brenda's eyes. "Mr. Valdemar," she said softly, "that is the real tragedy. Your restaurant should not be the only measure of your worth. Your fortune should not determine your value as an individual. Your dominance over others should not be the basis of your self-esteem." She approached him, leaving behind her hostile stance and adopting an almost maternal tone. He could have been a respected leader, someone who inspired others instead of degrading them. He could have created something sublime instead of an empire. Driven by fear, he chose the easy route. She continued, her voice resonating with palpable sadness. He confused power with leadership, intimidation with authority, and cruelty with strength. Sebastian looked at him, and for the first time that night, his eyes reflected neither anger nor contempt, but a bittersweet recognition. "And what comes next?" he asked, his voice trembling. At that moment, Williamson intervened. "You have a decision to make. Consider our offer to buy, which will be very favorable and allow you to keep." The choice was clear. Accept the loss of his financial independence, or face the possibility that tonight's story would be made public, with devastating consequences for his reputation. The message was blunt, and everyone in the restaurant understood that Sebastian Valdemar's reign had come to an end. Now the question was whether he would accept his downfall with what little dignity he had left, or whether he would try to drag everyone down with him. Williamson's threat hung over the Golden Palace, like an irrevocable verdict. For the first time in years, Sebastian Valdemar found himself without solutions, without plans, without the protection of his arrogance, which had been his shield throughout his life. He slumped into a chair in his restaurant, the same setting where he had offended numerous workers over the years, and for the first time, he truly contemplated the environment he had built, not from the perspective of the absolute owner, but from the position of someone who was about to. The fear of losing everything that had shaped his identity overwhelmed him. Tears welled up in his eyes, but they were not tears of self-pity, but tears of understanding. The kind of tears that come when someone recognizes themselves with an uncomfortable and absolute truth. He began, his voice trembling. "I wasn't like this before." Brenda, who had been watching him with a mixture of satisfaction and deep compassion, gradually approached him. Just as Valdemar had been previously, Sebastian looked up at her, and, for the first time in the darkness of the night, there was no evil in his eyes, only pain, uncertainty, and a kind of genuine shame. "When I started this restaurant," he whispered, "I was 25 years old." He had recently left college, full of dreams about building something extraordinary. He wanted this place to be unique. Carmen approached, her desire to know overcoming years of innate fear of her superior. "My first employee," he added. Sebastian kept his gaze fixed on Carmen, yet spoke as if confessing his sins. He introduced himself as Maria Elena, a woman the same age as my mother, taught me everything there was to know about real service, showing me how to make customers feel comfortable and valued. Although her hands trembled as she spoke, her wisdom was undeniable. I offered her a salary higher than I could afford because I felt she had earned it. We worked together, shoulder to shoulder. She called me my little boy, and I, for my part, treated her with the respect she deserved as a member of the family. Miguel, after leaving the kitchen, joined the group, captivated by this new side of Sebastian, one he had never seen before. What had happened to Maria Elena? Brenda asked delicately. Sebastian replied, "She died." Tears then streamed down his cheeks uncontrollably. "Breast cancer," he added. "She didn't have adequate health insurance and had no one to support her. I had the resources to help her, but I was so absorbed in growing the business that I thought she could wait." The atmosphere in the restaurant was filled with a deep, moving silence. "She died on a Tuesday morning," he continued, his voice barely audible. "I was in a meeting with bankers, discussing a loan to open the restaurant. When he arrived at the hospital, the pain was too intense. He hid his face, overcome with sadness. On the way home from the funeral, as he drove through the night, he made a decision. He would never again allow that kind of pain to consume him. Never again would he get so close to his employees that their anguish would affect him. The investors, with their phones and papers forgotten, were completely captivated by the testimony that was unfolding. And so, he erected barriers. Sebastian persisted. At first they were small. I let them go. Instead of asking about their families, and then their children, I stopped remembering their names until they became an indistinguishable mass. I began to treat them as tools rather than individuals. Brenda, with her experience in corporate restructuring, which included organizational psychology and toughness management, asked him gently, "When did this start?" Sebastian wiped his tears with the sleeve of his expensive suit. The first employee he publicly humiliated was named Roberto. He was a young man, about 20 years old, and he had stained a suit with wine in front of a valuable client. Instead of handling the situation professionally, I insulted him publicly. I humiliated him in front of everyone. And when the client laughed, seeing that my cruelty toward Roberto had amused him, something inside me broke. Anna had joined the group, her folder of papers forgotten on a nearby table. "It was then that I understood the usefulness of cruelty," Sebastian declared with a tone of self-loathing. High-powered clients felt superior when they saw how he treated his employees in a way that made them feel part of a select group, something that, according to him, benefited the business. But there, his voice became serious, laden with painful understanding. He acknowledged that by humiliating others, he avoided confronting his own guilt over what had happened to Maria Elena. He didn't have to reflect on how he had failed to protect someone he cared about. Miguel then approached him and, to everyone's amazement, placed a gentle hand on Sebastian's shoulder. "Mr. Valdemar," he said in a low voice, "I understand that suffering. I too have. The loss of loved ones affected me deeply." Sebastian looked at Miguel in amazement. For 15 years, he had seen this man almost every day, and despite having directed hundreds of hurtful words at him, he had never taken an interest in his personal life. "My wife," Miguel continued, "died in an accident 8 years ago. For months I became cruel to my own kitchen staff, because it was easier to be angry than to feel sad." "How? How did you get over it?" Sebastian inquired, and a palpable desperation laced his voice. His 10-year-old daughter asked him a question that made him think, why didn't she smile? Miguel responded with a simple truth. In that moment, he realized that his pain was transforming him into someone he didn't want to be. Brenda, observing the scene with professional interest, realized that a crucial moment was unfolding, the kind she had studied in cases of organizational transformation. "Mr. Valdemar," she said softly, "do you think Maria Elena would approve of the person you've become?" The question hit Sebastian with the force of a direct blow. His face contorted in agony, and for a moment he seemed unable to speak. She would be devastated. Finally, in a faint voice, he whispered, "Maria Elena had always maintained that people were the essence of any endeavor. She said that a restaurant without a soul was just a place to eat, but a restaurant with a soul was a place where people felt comfortable." Carmen approached, her own eyes filled with tears. "Mr. Valdemar, in all the time I've worked here, I've constantly wondered what happened to make you become so hard." Sebastian, with a thoughtful look, now said, "I see that you have no evil in your heart." Carmen replied, "You are hurt, and hurt people sometimes hurt others, without knowing how to deal with their own suffering." Mr. Williamson, who had been listening attentively, approached the group. "Sebastian," he said, using his first name, "what we have seen now clarifies many things, but it doesn't justify years of abuse toward your workers." "I understand." Sebastian replied without delay. "It's not that, in search of answers, I am simply trying to understand how I became someone other than myself." Brenda leaned in, her gaze intense. "The crucial question, however, is what you intend to do with that knowledge." Sebastian looked at her, and a transformation was visible in his eyes. Not the blinding arrogance of before, nor the utter despair, but a glimmer of hope, as if he were testing it. I want to do things right," he said cautiously. "I don't know how. I don't know if it's possible after so much harm, but I want to try." He turned to Carmen. "Carmen, you've been here for 10 years, and I still don't know if you have loved ones, if you have aspirations, if there's anything I can do to help you." Carmen was taken aback by the direct and sincere question. "I have 2 daughters," she replied cautiously. "One is studying nursing at university. The other aspires to be a chef in high school." Sebastian often asked her if she had had to choose between working here and being with them. Carmen confessed that the hours at this place are very strict, and when you're feeling down, sometimes I find myself working late to solve problems that, frankly, could have been avoided. Sebastian nodded, seeming to understand the employee's words for the first time. Then he turned his attention to Miguel. "Miguel, how is your daughter?" "She's 18 now." Miguel, still a little stunned by the personal question, replied, "Will she be starting college next semester? Will she choose a major related to cooking?" Miguel smiled slightly. "She wants to be a teacher. She wants to help children who have experienced the loss of their parents, just as she lost her mother," resonated with Sebastian. For a moment he was silent, reflecting on the words. "That's really admirable. You must be very proud." "I am," Miguel replied. "However, my concern is the cost of college education." "How much does she need?" Sebastian asked, and all eyes in the restaurant turned to him in amazement. "Mr. Valdemar," Miguel began. "No, really," Sebastian interrupted. "How much is the annual tuition?" "About $25,000, he replied. Miguel hesitated before replying. "Done," Sebastian affirmed without hesitation. Regardless of the fate of this restaurant, regardless of whether those gentlemen bought it or not, he was committed to financing his daughter's education. Miguel was stunned, while the other employees exchanged expressions of surprise. "What was the reason?" Miguel finally asked. Because his daughter aspires to help other children who have experienced loss, Sebastian replied, his voice filled with emotion. Because that is precisely what Maria Elena would have wanted to do. And because I need to start honoring her memory by doing something good instead of... Brenda watched the interaction with a mixture of professional and personal interest, fascinated. This genuine transformation, which she had studied in business school, was more than just an organizational change. It was a true personal evolution. Mr. Valdemar, she said carefully, where has this ability to connect, this empathy, this generosity that you are now showing, been all this time? Sebastian responded sincerely, although the truth was hidden under a weight of fear, guilt, and pride. With a defensive posture, he slowly stood up and scanned the faces of everyone watching him. Employees he had intimidated, investors he had let down, and Brenda, who had triggered this final confrontation. I can't undo years of mistreatment, he said, his voice now resonating more strongly. I can't bring back the time that has passed or the opportunities I missed to be better. But if these gentlemen are willing to give me a chance, if you are willing to give me a chance, I would love to be the kind of leader Maria Elena would have wanted, Mr. Chen said, exchanging glances with his colleagues. Sebastian, the question is not whether we are willing to give you a chance, but whether you are truly capable of making the intense effort that real change requires. Williamson added, what we have seen tonight indicates that you have exceptional employees who have performed well despite your leadership, not because of it. Any transformation must begin with your own learning process from them. Sebastian looked at Brenda, Carmen, Miguel, Ana, and the rest of the staff gathered around him. Were they willing to share with me, to guide me in the art of leading, rather than simply commanding? The silence that filled the room was thick, charged with a mixture of expectation and years of wounds that could not be healed with a simple expression of regret. It was Brenda who broke the silence, her voice conveying both hope and caution. Mr. Valdemar, change is possible, but it must be authentic, consistent, and lasting. It cannot be something you do for a couple of weeks until circumstances return to their usual state. Normality. Sebastian muttered the word. He didn't long for things to return to normal. Normality was intolerable. It hurt good people. He longed to build something better. At that moment, Brenda stood up, extended her hand, and said, "Are you ready to begin?" As Sebastian reached out to shake her hand, everyone in the restaurant felt that something essential had changed. It wouldn't be easy or quick, but for the first time in years, the possibility of real change was palpable. 6 months later, the morning sun streamed through the windows of the Golden Palace, but the scene had undergone a radical transformation. The sincere laughter of the workers mingled with the cheerful clinking of cutlery and the lively conversations of customers who, in addition to the culinary delights, enjoyed the warm and human atmosphere that permeated every space. Brenda Morales moved through the restaurant with the confidence of someone who had discovered not only a physical space, but also her place in it. Her goal was not the world, but her mission. She had left behind the waitress uniform that had embarrassed her on that horrible night. Now she wore a sophisticated executive suit that denoted her position as director of operations. But above all, it expressed the dignity she had never lost, only had to hide. "Good morning, Ms. Morales," Carmen replied with a cheerful glow on her face. At the age of 52, Carmen was promoted to customer service supervisor, a position that formally reflected the wisdom and knowledge she had acquired throughout her career, forged through years of hard work, without recognition. "Good morning, Carmen," "How is Patricia?" Brenda asked, referring to Carmen's youngest daughter, who was currently studying gastronomy, thanks to a full scholarship awarded by the restaurant's new educational program. "It's incredible. She called me yesterday from the Culinary Institute to share that her master chef had told her she has innate talent. Can you believe it? My little girl, who used to help me clean tables on Saturdays and Sundays, is now dedicating herself to learning culinary techniques." Carmen felt her eyes fill with tears of happiness, the kind of tears that flow when dreams that seemed unattainable suddenly come true. "And this was all thanks to you, Mrs. Morales, for your actions that night." Brenda patted her shoulder affectionately. "No, Carmen, all this success is the result of everyone's hard work. I was just the catalyst. The real change came from the courage of each individual who dared to believe that things could be different." From the moment Miguel walked out of the kitchen, he was no longer the nervous, insecure man he had been. Now his eyes conveyed the culinary passion that had been dormant for so long, and his confident demeanor indicated someone who finally felt appreciated and recognized. "Mrs. Morales," he said energetically, "the food critics from the nationally renowned newspaper arrived an hour ago. They are at table 7, and I just presented them with the new menu we created together." The new menu itself represented a transformation. For the first time in the restaurant's history, it had been created through a unique collaboration, with Miguel leading a team of chefs who felt free to express their creativity without restrictions. The recipes fused culinary techniques from around the world with local ingredients, offering a dining experience that was both sophisticated and authentic. Intrigued, Brenda asked sincerely, "And what was the response?" The lead critic questioned me about the creator of the menu concept. When I let him know that this result was the fruit of a collaborative process in which each chef contributed ideas, he was astonished. She declared that she had never witnessed such a high level of consistency and creativity in a single menu. Miguel paused for a moment, his voice filled with emotion. "The most striking thing happened when she asked me about the working atmosphere. I described the transformations we had undergone, our new ability to participate in decisions, and the professional growth programs. She replied that it was clear that the food was prepared with sincere love, beyond technique." At that moment, Ana Vasquez arrived. Brenda, now the financial director, walked in with a folder full of quarterly reports, a smile lighting up her face. Her evolution had been amazing, from a shy accountant to an influential voice in all key restaurant decisions. "You have to see these results," Ana exclaimed, unable to contain her enthusiasm. She opened the folder, revealing graphs and analyses that seemed to indicate exceptional success. In just 6 months, profitability had grown by 340%. The employee turnover rate had been reduced to 3%. Compared to 78% the previous year, we have experienced significant growth. Our customer satisfaction ratings remain at an exceptional 98%, and we currently have a waiting list for reservations that extends into the next 3 months. However, the most rewarding thing, according to Ana, who was brimming with professional pride, is that we have achieved these results while increasing the salaries of all our employees by an average of 45% and expanding benefits to include full medical coverage, educational programs, and family support. Brenda examined the numbers with the same satisfaction as someone who has witnessed a revelation. These results far exceed our most optimistic expectations. The reason is that when people feel appreciated and respected, they not only perform at a high level, according to Ana, but they develop a proactive attitude, driving innovation, collaboration, and commitment in exceptional ways that transcend any job description. At that moment, all eyes turned toward the staircase leading to the administrative area. Sebastian Valdemar descended slowly, but his former arrogance and tyranny, which had terrified his employees, were no longer reflected in him. His evolution had been as remarkable as that of the restaurant he belonged to. Now his style was more sober, but sophisticated. The stiffness that had previously permeated his posture had disappeared, replaced by a serenity in his eyes that reflected a deep inner peace. Most significantly, he was carrying a tray with coffees for all the members of the management team. "Good morning," he greeted them with genuine kindness that continued to amaze the employees who had experienced his previous leadership. I served him coffee. It's a new blend that Miguel recommended for. Accompanying breakfast was a simple gesture, but it reflected a significant change within him. The man who once saw helping others as degrading now found joy in small acts of consideration toward his team. "Thank you, Sebastian," Brenda replied with a smile as she accepted the coffee, a smile that reflected the special connection they had forged over the past few months, a unique blend of mentor, colleague, and friend. It was a relationship that showed them both that authentic leadership was based on reciprocity, not hierarchical imposition, was the goal. "How was your therapy session yesterday?" Brenda asked with genuine concern. Sebastian had started psychological therapy 3 months ago, not out of obligation, but because he himself had realized that he needed professional support to overcome decades of harmful behavioral habits. "It was eye-opening," he replied candidly. "The doctor helped me understand how the pain of losing Maria Elena drove me to create protective mechanisms that unfortunately hurt many innocent people. But also, he made me realize that real change is possible when there is a sincere commitment to it." With palpable respect, he turned to Miguel. "Miguel, could you show me that preparation technique you mentioned yesterday? I want to better understand culinary methods so I can contribute more effectively to operational decisions." The scene of Sebastian Valdemar humbly asking for instruction in culinary techniques would have been unthinkable 6 months ago. It had become part of his daily routine to learn from employees whom he had once looked down on, even though their wisdom and experience were considerable. "Of course, Mr. Sebastian," Miguel replied kindly. In the first few months, it had been difficult for the workers to adapt to the new Sebastian, but little by little, they had begun to see that the transformation was genuine and lasting. Carmen approached the group with an envelope that had arrived that morning. "Mrs. Morales, is this mail for you? It's from Harvard University." Brenda approached the letter with curiosity, and as she read its contents, Brenda's expression turned to one of complete surprise. "Really?" Anna asked curiously. Brenda, with a look of disbelief, replied that it was an invitation to give a keynote speech at her business school. "They want me to talk about transformational leadership and dignity in today's workplace?" Brenda exclaimed. The amazement that followed was palpable. In just 6 months, Brenda had evolved from a humiliated waitress to a prominent figure, becoming a case study at one of the world's most renowned universities. "You're going to say yes, right?" insisted Sebastian, and a genuine satisfaction could be heard in his tone. "I don't know," Brenda replied thoughtfully. "It's an exceptional opportunity, but it would also mean being away from the restaurant at a crucial time of growth." "Brenda," Anna interrupted, "you have to accept it. What we've achieved here needs to be shared with other business leaders. Think of how many workers could benefit if more CEOs knew these principles." Miguel nodded enthusiastically. "Mrs. Morales, You taught us that our stories hold power. Your story could transform the lives of many people who are in situations similar to the ones we went through. Carmen approached and took Brenda's hands tenderly, like a mother. My daughter, for years I suffered in silence, feeling ignored, thinking that my purpose was only to obey and work without looking up. You showed me that my story, my wisdom, my very essence mattered. Her eyes welled up with tears. If sharing your story can help other Carmens, other Miguels, other Brendas around the world, know that they deserve. If someone values respect and dignity, they have an ethical responsibility to act accordingly. Sebastian approached with palpable humility. Brenda, 6 months ago, you gave me the opportunity to become a better person. Now you have the chance to teach other leaders what you taught me. What specific lesson did you teach me? Brenda asked with sincere interest. Sebastian replied without hesitation. Authentic leadership is not about proving your superiority over others. It's about helping others discover and cultivate their own potential. You instilled in me that by lifting up those who work alongside us, we all rise together. He paused, looking around the restaurant, which was now buzzing with vibrant, positive energy. You made me understand that true wealth doesn't lie in material riches, but in lives that have been positively transformed. And you showed me that it is never too late to evolve, to be better, to choose compassion over cruelty. At that moment, a young woman approached the group with some shyness. Patricia, who was Carmen's daughter, had just arrived from her cooking school and was eager to share with her mother the dish she had created as her final project. Mom, she said with emotion she was struggling to contain, I want to show this to you first. Patricia had designed an elegant version of a typical dish from her neighborhood, elevating simple ingredients through cutting-edge culinary techniques. It was an accurate representation of the transformation they had both undergone, turning the ordinary into something exceptional without sacrificing its essence. The authentic essence was evident in every bite. Carmen, upon tasting the dish, was moved to tears. My daughter, she whispered emotionally, this is pure art. It represents our neighborhood, our culture, but elevated to a level I never imagined possible. I learned from Miguel, Patricia, she said, looking gratefully at the head chef. He taught me that the greatness of cooking lies in honoring our roots while allowing ourselves to dream big. Miguel approached and tasted the dish, confirming, Patricia, this is professional excellence. When you finish your studies, I want you to come to... Being the chef at this place left her wide-eyed. Seriously, Patricia, in the Golden Palace. Miguel nodded, but not the Golden Palace everyone knew, but the one that had been transformed into something new. A place where talent is recognized, creativity is celebrated, and each individual is valued for their ability to contribute. Brenda watched the conversation with intense emotion. This was precisely what she had dreamed of when she accepted the position, to create an environment where people didn't only work individually, but aspire to thrive together. You know what? She said in a clear, firm voice. I will accept Harvard's invitation, but I will not do it alone. Everyone turned to look at her with interest. Carmen, Ana, Miguel, Sebastian, all of you will accompany me on this journey because this is not my fight. It is our common fight. And if we want to transform the world's perception of leadership and dignity in the workplace, we need all our perspectives to be heard. The enthusiasm that followed her announcement was palpable. The notion that everyone should be recognized as contributors had never considered such a thing. A transformation of this magnitude was unthinkable. However, Brenda, with her eyes fixed on Sebastian, added, I want you to open the conference. Sebastian, surprised, asked, "Me?" Brenda replied, "Because your transformation is the most remarkable of all. It's common for people to praise employees who stand up against injustice, but your experience shows that even those who have made mistakes can evolve, can learn, can transform themselves into agents of good. However, the most difficult, but also the most crucial thing is to demonstrate that redemption is possible." Brenda continued, emphasizing that harmful leaders are not destined to perpetuate their behavior if they are truly willing to make the effort to change. Sebastian was silent for a long moment, clearly moved by the confidence Brenda was showing him. "Do you really think my experience can help others?" he asked, with palpable vulnerability. "I am convinced that your story can help other people." Brenda replied with conviction. "Think about how many leaders, managers, and people in positions of authority could hear your story and recognize themselves before it's too late." Anna approached with a new folder, this time with documents from other restaurants and companies. With a smile, and referring to the impact, she said, "We've received more than 50 requests for advice from companies looking to adopt management models similar to yours. It seems that our narrative has transcended the boundaries of our own company." Miguel continued, "3 of my friends, who are chefs, have told me that their superiors have improved their treatment of them after learning about what happened here." Carmen laughed. "My sister, who works at a hotel, told me that her supervisor stopped raising his voice at the cleaning staff after I told him about our experience." "Do you understand what this means?" Brenda asked as she looked around at everyone in the group. "Our story wasn't limited to us. It's spreading, expanding, transforming behaviors in places where even now, when we know." Sebastian approached the window overlooking the city, the same one from which he had previously gazed down at the crowd with a condescending look. But now he sensed something different. It was different, he said softly, from what he had seen before. Looking out this window, he saw a city populated by individuals he considered inferior to himself. Today, however, he saw a city inhabited by people with stories, aspirations, abilities, and dignity that deserve to be valued. Then he addressed the group. "Do you know what the most amazing thing about all this is? Not only that, by changing restaurants, we changed our perspective on humanity itself." Just then, a messenger arrived with a bouquet of flowers and a card. It was from the family of Maria Elena, Sebastian's first employee, who had passed away some time ago. "Mr. Valdemar," Carmen read the message aloud. "We were informed about the renovation of the restaurant through mutual acquaintances. Our mother was always convinced of your kindness. We are convinced that she would be proud of the person you have become." Sebastian took the card, holding it with trembling hands, tears streaming down his cheeks. "Finally, I am honoring your memory in the way you truly deserve," he whispered. Brenda approached, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "Sebastian, do you realize what the most important lesson is that this whole situation has taught us?" "What is it?" "It's never too late to strive for improvement, that the past doesn't have to dictate the future, and that when an individual finds the courage to change, they can genuinely inspire transformations that extend far beyond themselves." Something he would never have considered possible. He looked around, watching employees working with palpable satisfaction, customers enjoying not only high-quality cuisine, but also a welcoming atmosphere and leadership that had understood that true success is reflected in shared dignity. Brenda added that 6 months ago, she was a woman struggling to support her family and willing to take any job available. You had become a man who, in his relentless pursuit of power, had lost his humanity. Carmen, Miguel, Ana, we were all in a system that reduced us. But the moment we decided we deserved better, when we found the strength to demand respect, when we chose empathy over brutality, we not only transformed our lives, we started a revolution of humanity that spreads beyond our reach. Sebastian, with a deep understanding reflected in his eyes, realized that it all started with a brave woman who refused to be seen as less than she truly was. Brenda corrected him gently. Nothing more. He was born when each of us remembered ourselves as human beings, worthy of respect, regardless of our position, our salary, or our history. In that unique moment, with the sun bathing the transformed restaurant, we all understood that we had participated in something much more significant than a mere business transformation. They had proven that human dignity is unbreakable, that authentic change is possible, and that people coming together with mutual respect can work wonders. The Golden Palace. It was no longer just a restaurant. It had evolved into a symbol of hope, tangible proof that the world can be transformed, one person at a time, one decision at a time, one act of courage after another. And as they prepared for their trip to Harvard to tell their story to the world, they all understood that this was just the beginning of an even greater transformation, for they had learned the most essential lesson of all. When we treat every person with the respect they deserve, we all rise together. And that lesson, once released into the world, has the power to transform everything it touches into something new.